Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our attendees joining us today for this latest Data Science Central webinar. This is Bill Voorhees, your host. I'm the editorial director with Data Science Central. And also Chief Data Scientist for Data Magnum. I'd like to start off our event today by thanking Alteryx for sponsoring today's event. Alteryx is an integral supporter of the Data Science Central community, and we're honored to have them sponsoring our event today. I'd also like to take this opportunity to mention and show our appreciation for some of our other recent sponsors, including Annalect, Dell Statistica, Tableau, IBM, Teradata, Crowdflower, and Exaptive, to name just a few. Now, past webinars are available on demand at datasciencecentral.com, and if you haven't had an opportunity to view them, I encourage you to take a look. They provide some very useful insight into a wide variety of topics of interest to our data science community. Today's topic is a roundtable covering 10 facts about the state of data analytics in Europe. And before we begin, I'd like to briefly review the format of today's webinar. Today's event will be an hour long. We'll have 4 panelists that I'll introduce in just a minute. There'll be a 10 to 15 minute Q&A following the presentation, and this event is being recorded and will be available on datasciencecentral.com later this afternoon following today's live event. I'd also like to encourage our attendees to provide questions throughout the presentation. We'll be reviewing and presenting them on your behalf during the Q&A portion of today's event. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce today's speakers, Stuart Wilson, Andy Cotgreave, Nick Sammy, and Simon Hayter. Now, Stuart is VP EMEA at Alteryx and is responsible for Alteryx's business across Europe, the Middle East, and Africa, leading a fast-growing team spreading across the UK, Germany, and Denmark. Stuart joined Alteryx in 2014 as the first employee on the ground in Europe. And prior to that, he worked in the IT security space, building new teams in new markets, and has also worked as a stockbroker in London. Stuart's a proud Canadian expat, but considers himself a Londoner, having lived there since 2003. Now, Andy is a visual analytics expert who's been with Tableau in various roles since 2011, ranging from product consultant to social content manager. He's now Tableau's senior technical evangelist, and prior to Tableau, Andy was a data analyst at the University of Oxford. As a technical evangelist, he helps people see and understand the data using Tableau's innovative products. Now, Nick has 18 years of experience in the media industry. As a consultant for Annalect, Nick works on the Omnicom group to drive business and marketing communication strategy using data and analytics. So over his career in media, he's worked in insight, forecasting, brand health tracking, and now technology and data, bringing a well-rounded view to the mix. Simon, Chief Analytics Officer at Close Brothers, was brought in to introduce analytics as a new function within its retail finance business and to help it develop the wider bank. Now, previously, he was Group Head of Analytics at Countrywide PLC, where he was responsible for bringing multiple data sets across multiple systems to provide customer insights and business performance within wider property market. But during his time at Countrywide, he also worked closely with the Office of National Statistics and the government departments, advising on rental market and assisting with the official ONS rental index. Simon holds an MBA from Cranfield and a postgrad in economics from Birkbeck University of London. So thanks to all of you for being with us today. We're looking forward to your presentation. So how much is data driving decisions today? Alteryx recently surveyed senior business stakeholders across Europe to ask about their attitudes about data and analytics. The findings of the survey were summarized in Business Grammar Research Report, which explores how data is accessed and harnessed, and the expectations around decision-making, and how important data proficiency really is in the modern business world. So here's a glimpse at some key findings. 96% use data and analytics to inform business decisions today. 59% of European business leaders consider data and analytics savviness to be one of the 2 most important skills for new employees. And data and analytics skills are now considered more important than industry experience or a second language. So in today, this panel will share their views on the 10 most remarkable findings from this report and discuss their predictions on the future of data analytics. So Stuart, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. You can begin as soon as you're ready to go.
Thanks, Bill, and hello, everyone. Thanks for coming on the call today. So as Bill mentioned, we at Alteryx released this report, the Business Grammar Report, last month. And it's really a piece of research that we did at the State of Analytics in Europe. We talked to many business leaders across multiple industries. We talked to people in 5 key markets in Europe. And the report's really interesting. It gives us some good insights into how analytics are used today, the general attitude towards analytics and decision-making, and importantly, how these business leaders view how analytics will evolve in the future. So the topic of the conversation, as Bill mentioned, is to go through some of the more interesting insights from that report, and we've got 10 of them today. So let's get started. First, we'll go to the first statistic, which Bill mentioned already. 96% of people surveyed use data and analytics to inform business decisions today. Okay, so this is really not a surprise. Basically, all of us are using analytics in some way. But the more interesting insights come down to when we look at exactly how people are using analytics and what their views are on how this will evolve. So let's move on to the second point, where we'll start the conversation. In 2 years, 37% expect data and analytics to be essential to decision-making versus 29% today. So Nick, Sammy, I'll ask you, how do you look at this today, and how important is analytics becoming to you at your company?
Hi. So I certainly think I was quite surprised at the statistic, and I thought it was actually quite low, because in advertising, I think certainly now there's been a huge shift and a huge paradigm towards data centricity, and certainly with one of the new agency networks we've set up, we've kind of put data at the heart of what we do. So, and the key thing for us is there is so much data out there for our clients right now, and their expectation is that we can kind of harness it, bring it together, and then help them analyze it and do some good stuff with it in terms of predictive modeling and just some basic analytics.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Nick. We go to the next point. We see that 46% of people surveyed reported that they use data from more than 5 separate sources for decision making. Simon, can you comment on this and how it relates to your sort of day-to-day business at Close Brothers?
Yeah, sure. Hi. So, yeah, I think this is quite prominent because we've got many different data sets across the wider bank that I work in, and what we really want to understand is not only our business performance from a financial point of view, but how are our customers behaving, how is our operations kind of mapping and helping that customer journey. So, I mean, 5, I would say, is almost a small amount of source of data. And even though many companies will have, say, a kind of a big project to consolidate all of your data sets, there's always new data sets that are popping up everywhere. So what we're really trying to introduce here is not only combining all of our internal data sets, but bringing in a wider external set of data sets. And as the market grows, as more free data sources become available, there's almost an ever-ending sources of data everywhere. So you really need to have a process where you can gather data sets, blend data sets, join data sets together with a real end goal in mind.
This is Andy here. That's a great answer. But one thing I noticed on this question is, well, yeah, most people admit to having lots of data sets, but the thing I find fascinating here is 26% of respondents say they have all their data in one place. And I think that's one of these issues we have in organizations, particularly if senior business leaders are answering a question saying they all have their data in one place. I actually wonder if they're getting out into the field and speaking to all the employees across their organization, because I know even in Tableau, a company where we're driven by data, we still have lots of siloed data sets. Even if it's something as simple as an ad hoc Excel file or something we've downloaded from the internet that we're doing some analytics to, linking it with other data in the organization. We've got a great data warehouse, and lots of companies do, but you cannot, I just think it's impossible to get all the data in one place, because people across an organization have questions that arise quickly, unpredictably, and they end up in small data sets or even biggish databases, that might exist in one department. And that's multiple data sources that need to be blended together, processed together into one data source from which we can make good data decisions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And also, you might want data sets where you just want to prototype something and then decide actually that hypothesis was wrong. So you don't want to bring that data into your data warehouse, because it would just be a waste of time and effort. So.
That's absolutely right. That exploration, it's like what if, and you can try something, throw it away, but then if that is a successful model, then you can incorporate it into the central data set.
Yeah, and certainly, Andy, I also agree with your comments of, I think there's they don't know what they don't know, and I've certainly worked with clients when we've gone through the kickoff point to talk about data and analytics, of trying to gather who's got what data where and what format it's in. And I think it's quite a key thing now for us, certainly, or in any industry, is to kind of sit down with our clients and try and figure out, okay, what have they got and who's got that data and what can we use it for? And, that kind of data auditing and data mapping process can take, months, but it's something that I definitely think that, we as all organizations in all industries really need to work a lot harder at.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting there is sometimes, we think, well, in an ideal world, we'd bring all this data into one single place, right? And, my experience is you go to these departments and they're like, well, this little bit is our data. We kind of control this data. And if you take it all away from us, then that becomes a problem for that department, because they lose control. Whereas if you can actually leave the data where it is, but create processes to merge the data sets together, then you're working with everyone across an organization to work in sort of the models and processes that they've already built.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Great comments. And I think there's some agreement that there's a lot of different data spread across companies everywhere, which leads us to this next interesting point. Even with that said, it still looks like Excel dominates. So Excel still is the main source of data for analytics. 50% of people that responded said this. Andy, if we can stick with you, I mean, you being with Tableau, you've seen a big shift towards self-service analytics tools over the years that you've been there. In your view, how's the role of Excel evolving? And I think we may have lost Andy. Anyone? Nick or
sorry.
Simon?
Sorry, I forgot. I was still on mute. Excel is totally a dominant tool still, and it's got some really good advantages in what it does. You can export data from other systems and kind of do some manipulations on it pretty straightforwardly. But the challenge is, Excel does not enable you to do exploration. You can crunch numbers really powerfully, but what people seek, and we talked about it a moment ago, the unknown unknowns. When you're looking at a data set, you need to be churning through different views of the data, trying to find that eureka moment. What's the golden nugget that's kind of hidden in that data? And the problem with Excel is it's very, very hard to explore data very, very quickly. And I think we're seeing people still use Excel in conjunction with other tools that they have. But when it comes to that exploration, finding impactful insight, that's where we would recommend they start to look elsewhere.
Nick or Simon, Nick, what do you think about Excel? I mean, you obviously have people using Excel in the organization. Do you think that this is going to continue at the pace it is, or are you seeing any sort of interesting shifts?
I think we're kind of in two places with Excel. I think some people have, and certainly the analytics side of the business, has recognized that whilst it's a useful tool to Andy's point, there are much more flexible and powerful tools to explore data. I think the hard thing is it's about change management and getting people to move away from what they're familiar with. And certainly I was having a chat yesterday with our global CIO, and it's one of his kind of bugbears of saying, I don't want to get rid of it, but I want people to realize that there's a lot of other tools and technologies that we as a company have invested in to try and make life easier and not, go back to Excel as the default button. And I think, in my experience in the last 2 years of deploying Tableau and Alteryx within our company, it's been a real eye-opener for me in terms of, learning about the flexibility of new technology and realizing also about how dependent people have been on Excel and trying to move them away from that.
Yeah, I agree. Although I'm kind of torn here because I'm still kind of a big fan of Excel for certain purposes. So I kind of used to work in finance many years ago, and that really was the kind of key driver for financial analysis. And it's still it's a good platform for people just to learn, to get used to using data, to play with data, get the principle of pivots, because I've always kind of found that if you understand how to use data in Excel, you can easily transfer that skills to more powerful machinery, and then you kind of can really blow your mind as to what you can do after that. So there's definitely a place for Excel in the world, although I don't think it should be brought into like the data and analytics. It definitely should be a financial tool, a very kind of, say, basic tool for people to get used to using and to get number literate, used to using numbers. I kind of actually thought the stat was quite low at 46%. I'd have thought it would be much higher, actually. It's almost the majority of companies that I come in contact with is almost everything's done on Excel, with only a very few kind of core crack team using more advanced technology.
Yeah, there's some interesting outputs from all these questions that we asked. We sort of grouped them by age, by role, by country. It's interesting to look at this one from the age category. So if you look at the younger age groups, what is your primary use of primary analytics tool? Excel was the answer in 48% of the age group from 16 to 29, and it progressively goes up. So when you get to the 60 plus category, it's 72%. So there does seem to be some sort of shift, perhaps away from it, at least for certain functions in younger generations, which is fairly interesting. Okay, so let's move to the next point, and this one is perhaps some good news for many of the people listening to the call who consider themselves data proficient. 79% of business leaders would offer a higher salary to somebody who is data proficient. And I think on this question, it's an interesting stat, but it kind of brings into the question around data proficiency and what is it. So Simon, as a leader of an analytics function, what does this say to you about being data proficient?
Yeah, I found this answer quite interesting, actually. I suppose it comes down to how the business leaders interpreted the term data proficient. So obviously in my kind of world, it's if you're not data proficient, you couldn't even get a role here. But I think it's much more almost a skill set of how people may interpret data proficiency, meaning you can program and you can kind of use IT to an advanced level. I'd probably come from an alternative way, so that's not necessarily data proficient. That means you're technology proficient. Data proficient is really understanding what you're doing and how it relates to the business that you're in, of which people who can have that skill do tend to go higher in the organization. Whether I'd offer somebody a higher salary for the same role for data proficiency, then I kind of find that an interesting concept. I definitely think people with data proficiency are definitely more employable. I definitely know the best marketeers I've met are marketeers who've got a very analytical mindset, and they can combine the numbers with very artistic and good promotions to back up their theories. In the same way, good CFOs are people who can translate financial numbers to a commercial sense. But I do find it an interesting point that somebody would get a higher salary. I would just say they're more employable rather than necessarily earning a higher salary. So it's a really interesting stat.
Yeah, I think I'll just jump in there, and I think we within the ad industry have noticed also a big change towards being more data centric, and the rise of the data or the marketing scientist is something that's been, I think, quite prolific over the last few years. As to the comment about whether we'd pay more for that, I think there's a salary that can be commanded for obviously analytics function and people who are data and number crunchers. But I don't know whether, from a non-analytics point of view, we would say, yes, we'll pay someone who's more data proficient, because I think in the changing world that we'd expect people to be what I call data literate, kind of as a baseline, because, I think there's not an industry out there that doesn't rely on numbers in some way, shape or form, and being able to look at those numbers and see the story.
Yeah, I agree, Nick. This is Andy. And I think, we talk about this a lot internally at Tableau about, well, do we pay people a premium? And, at the moment, I think there is a premium for people with real tangible data skills. But we sort of think, well, 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, you could get a premium, or you would put on your resume, I'm a Microsoft Word expert, or I'm a PowerPoint expert. Whereas now, you wouldn't really expect to see that on a CV. You'd expect anybody coming out of university or school and applying for a job in marketing or sales or HR or wherever to just have that proficiency. And increasingly, we want to see that the same thing happen to all these data skills. It's like, you shouldn't have to tell us you're data illiterate, because in order to function in the 21st century, you just kind of need to be. And, so with 79% of business leaders still paying this premium, it reveals to us, or this research potentially shows that actually those skills are not being pushed into people at an early enough age, which I would recommend they should be.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, even just a live example now, coming to an organ I joined, so Crest Brothers, beginning of this year in January, and there's some very, very good data proficiency people here. And I would say they're much more from the, as you kind of alluded to, the traditional sense of very SAS, SQL coding, very much programming type. And then we've just got this young, what we call an Aspire program, people just from school, so he must be 19, 20. No real interest in going into kind of analytics or finance. Gave him a copy of Tableau and he's just run off with it. Absolutely no training needed. He's just got that inbuilt in him because he's grown up in the digital age. And I couldn't agree more that it's just going to become the norm, and in say 10 years' time, you wouldn't even have that on your CV because it's just the way of the world.
Yeah.
I also
without him
think
even realizing he's data proficient. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say he wouldn't even say that he's an analyst or data proficient. It's just he's so used to using digital technology that Tableau is something that's second nature to him, which I think
fascinating.
It's a great selling point for Tableau, I suppose. So, but the other point is just how, I suppose, the younger generation's mind work.
Yeah.
No, I agree, and I also wonder whether that stat of 79% say they'd offer a higher salary, whether that's an indication that people think, it's almost like a panic buy in the sense of if we offer more money, they will come, because it's the realization that data is so important, I think, in businesses. So it's almost like a contradiction to their first thing of saying, only 37% expect data and analytics to be essential in 2 years' time. I think that shows to me that there are a lot of people going, okay, we've got to get kind of more savvy, we've got to get data literate people in. And I think also to your point about what is the baseline, Excel used to be the baseline with PowerPoint, and I think things like Tableau, Alteryx, and all those different types of BI software will become much more the norm as people, kind of change over time in terms of the digital age.
Yep.
Yeah, thanks, guys. A similar point here on point 6, 80% believe that data analytics should be a compulsory part of the MBA program, or of any MBA program. And again, I'm surprised that this is still a question, or that there's still 20% that are saying it shouldn't be, just based on your comments previously. So, Simon, maybe you can comment on this. You've completed an MBA program. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, couldn't agree more with this statistic. So, I mean, obviously, I know that all MBA programs are different and where you go, but very much there wasn't a data analytics module at all when I did mine. There was a statistics module, there was a finance module where you kind of did touch on figures, but the statistics module, it was pure statistics. It was no different to having a extended maths lesson, and almost the exam and the projects was almost algebra, and it really irritated me because it just became a memory game. So those who were just naturally good at maths got the top marks, and those that really struggled with maths but have very good business sense really struggled on that module. And it's kind of like, well, you would never use this. Yes, you'd use it in the real world to a degree, but not in the way it was being taught. And funnily enough, even though all the other modules were saying you've got to have data to back up your theory, or the projects you do, you've got to have data to back it up, there was no, I suppose, teaching to say this is the best way to visualize data. Even the IT modules were very much a project management aspect of it, or the focus is a better word. So even though it was very useful to say, yes, this is how you need to kind of implement IT in your organization and make sure you're serving the business need and get your questions right, it was still very much of a project management focus rather than how would you actually use the data to drive business decisions. So I think it should be absolutely core. However, I am torn between whether it should be a specific module called data analytics in an MBA program, or whether data analytics should just be kind of put inside all of the modules as just this is a technique you should be using whatever you're doing, whether it's HR, marketing, operations, finance. I'd probably rather do it from that point of view rather than having a siloed, this is data analytics and this is what you do. I'd rather see it embedded in across the board.
Yeah, I really like that last point. I mean, and I'd go even one step further. It's like, well, 80% believe that analytics could be a part of MBA programs. Well, why should the MBAs get the privilege of a core skill that everybody needs in life? We've sort of talked about this. Whether it's somebody in sales or HR, they need to be able to play with data. And I have a 9-year-old daughter and a 7-year-old daughter. Both of them are being taught data as part of the curriculum in Key Stage 2 and 1. And it's kind of cool, but then they all get told to build pie charts, right? And I go, well, daughter, pie charts aren't as good as bar charts. She looks at me like I'm kind of boring daddy. But the point is, teaching that basic element of data analytics, it's happening in schools. But you can just add to it and say, well, look, the extra things you can do with data are really powerful. And as I think it was Simon said a moment ago, with a 19-year-old who just picked up a tool, Tableau, and just goes with it without thinking about data analytics. We've got this chance to educate the next generation of children to just see it as a core skill, as important as reading, writing, and basic maths. Because whoever the person is, whatever they're going to do in their future lives, it's going to benefit everybody across an organization. So, yes, it should be part of an MBA program, but I kind of hope that by the time people are getting into MBAs, they already know everything they need to know.
I think it's interesting, actually, also. I totally agree with everything you guys have said. I think it's definitely part of an MBA, but certainly within our companies that we have across the board, part of the learning and development programs, they've changed from the kind of presentation skills and so on, and we still have that. But a lot of the stuff we're now doing is about, data and data literacy and understanding where all this data comes from. Because I think there's two sides of it. Of one, being able to go, okay, I know what I'm doing with data, but it's also from our side, understanding where this data is generated from, and therefore thinking about how you can then use it to make decisions. And I think that's a really big shift that, when I started 18 years ago, the research function was the kind of back office and you never got in front of clients. And the researcher was the guy in the room who no one knew their name. Whereas now they are very much front and center. And I think that's right, and I think it's great. And now people are recognizing that, and it's, becoming part of training programs to onboard people in companies. And I think that's a great thing now.
Yep.
Okay, thanks, guys. Next point. Only 29% of those surveyed are using self-service analytics tools today. I work for a self-service analytics vendor, and this is we live and breathe this every day. And I think we sometimes have the view that everybody's doing it. Andy, you're sort of in the same boat. Does this number surprise you?
Yes, it does. When I first saw the results of the survey a couple of weeks ago when you published it, it was like, oh, that's in some ways it made my heart sink a little bit, because it's like, well, that's not very many. That's less than a third. But then the positive side of it is you think about the opportunity. You know, then there's 71% of people who are still to see the light, and I think it comes down to this culture of balancing the needs of IT. IT obviously needs to create a governed, secure environment in which to share data, and traditionally that meant using tools where only a select few could touch the data, could play with the data and create results and dashboards. So there's still a huge amount of that legacy style of platforms. Now, Alteryx and Tableau, we've obviously seen lots of customers and organizations adopt a new approach where IT can still govern and securely share data sources, but what they've relinquished is the actual exploration and dashboard design to the people who have the questions. So I guess I'm in my little Tableau bubble. Some of you guys are in your Alteryx bubble. I'm sort of immersed in this all the time. So I'm surprised that it's so low, but I guess there's still a huge opportunity for us all there to try and convert people to a new way of doing things.
No, I certainly agree with that. I think it's changing over time, but to the points that we've touched on earlier about trying to figure out what data we've got, where the data comes from, and how we house it. Do we put it into a big data warehouse, or do we have stuff where we have a little area for concept testing and like a little sandbox? And I think it depends on how people have interpreted the self-service analytics, because they may see a BI platform as kind of a standard reporting or output tool. So, and it's not really self-service. It's served to you. It's an interesting one, I think, and certainly from our point of view, the way now we're really encouraging people to kind of get their hands dirty with data and come back and ask our analytics and stats guys and girls to kind of provide them with more insight and say, I don't understand why this is happening. Why does my ad campaign on this channel work really well, but it doesn't work so well on this one? So, I think we need to encourage people to not be afraid of data and to be able to kind of, dig in and try and find out some exciting insights.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting stat which looks very low at 29%. So when I first saw it, I thought, yeah, that's low. But then I thought about it from a different view, and I kind of thought, actually, in some ways, it's quite high. So if you think about self-service analytics tools being almost defined as self-service, so things like Alteryx and the visualization, or like with Tableau, Power BI, ClickView. If I was to just walk around randomly around the UK going into, say, 10 companies at random, I'd be pretty surprised if 3 of them, which would be like the 30%, would actually have had these products. Because even when I joined the bank, it was me kind of said, well, we should just start bringing in things like Alteryx, Tableau into the organization. A few people had heard of Tableau, not many. I was quite surprised how few people had heard of it. And nobody had heard of Alteryx at all. And even in my previous organization, we had only kind of started bringing in these type of self-service analytics a year ago. And even for myself, it was, I guess, almost fairly late-ish in my career a couple of years ago where I started to hear about it. So I kind of think, going back to Andy's comment and Stuart's almost, when you live in a bubble, you think it's everywhere, and I've been in very similar situations. Early on in my career, I worked for an online gambling company, and just was almost everybody assumed that the whole world was online and gambled because you just did it every single day and you were in that environment. Very similar to when companies might do a marketing campaign. The whole company knows about it. So everybody in the company will see those adverts, be associated with adverts, and think that everybody in the world has seen those adverts, and you then find out that they haven't. So in some ways, the 29% is quite high. I'd be quite surprised if 3 out of 10 companies, especially in the UK, were using self-service analytics in the way that we're describing self-service analytics. I think there's there's definitely, and it's a great opportunity because I think we're right at the beginning of a revolution's an extreme word, but I think we're right at the beginning of almost a 10-year phase where by the end of the next 10 years it will just be the norm. PowerPoint will disappear and it really will be. We'll be presenting in visualization tools such as Tableau, Power BI. It definitely will take over. But no, it's definitely it looks like a low stat. Look at it from another view, it's quite high. But I think we're only at the beginning of our journey.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the history of spreadsheets, and VisiCalc was the late 70s, and then it wasn't until like the late 90s that Excel sort of became the market leader and everywhere, right? So it's a slow process. This is a big change to self-service. It's taken 20, 30 years for Excel to become an accepted universal tool. So maybe we're expecting things to go faster than they actually will do, and maybe the pervasive self-service analytics tools will take another 10, 15 years.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I'm not sure how old you guys are, but when I started working, the fax machine was the main form of communication. Email was hardly ever done at all. And I'm sure it wasn't long ago when BlackBerries, burst on the scene, and then they've now disappeared very quickly. So it's rapidly changing.
Yeah. I think sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think the other thing is the speed of change is increasing, if that doesn't sound too ridiculous. Mm-hmm. But I think, to your point of, faxes were the norm, and, that's how we in advertising booked TV spots through fax. That was like 20 years ago. Yeah. Whereas now the change with things like smartphones and all these different things and people being much more data and tech savvy, I think it's the speed at which it's changing is I think it's going to be a lot less than 10 years. I think within the next 5, there's going to be a very, very big shift so that people yes, they'll still use Excel, but I think there'll be a real change in the way people look and visualize data.
I'll tell you something that I see happening right now is that the hype cycle for machine learning and artificial intelligence is ramping up, and we're seeing these kind of a huge amount of stuff around that side of the future of data. And I have a problem with that because I think people are going to start focusing on that when they haven't even focused on the problem that people can't use data across their own organization. And instead of focusing on that problem, they're going to start investing in these flagship, small scope AI or machine learning projects, right? Whereas they could actually just enable everybody in their organization. And that's a real problem because it's like, getting everybody to self-service and find their own answers in data as and when they need to is going to create way more insights than just investing in a select few tools and a select few questions, which have the sort of high, sexy new technology. So, my fear is as this rapid change progresses, we don't forget what the important goals businesses should achieve are.
Yeah, that's a good point, Andy, and I think that kind of goes to the heart of the next point around, what are some of the challenges that companies are facing when they're trying to make this transition into self-service. And this one says that incomplete data for decision-making is the biggest problem. If we go to the chart, you can see all the different reasons. So the data is incomplete. It takes too long for my team to pull together data I need. The data has lots of errors in it. I can't get the specific combination of data sources. They're all saying really similar things. Nick, is this still an issue in the company, or how have you seen this kind of progress in the last couple of years?
It's absolutely still a problem. I think it goes back to the point I made earlier about not knowing what you don't know in terms of the data that you have. I think it's also that not all the data sources are perfect, and they need kind of a lot of fiddling around, and hence why things like Alteryx is a good piece of kit to have and make it easier. I think it's trying to get hold of different types of data where you've got different levels of granularity. You've got to think about harmonizing data, and it's quite a big kind of Rubik's Cube almost of a puzzle to think, okay, well, what have I got in my hand, and where do I want to get to? And it's the kind of end goal I think you need to think about of what are the things I'd really like to do with this data? And I think, clients feel like they're drowning in data. They're always talking about big data. And I think our job as consultants is to say, okay, there's a lot of data out there, but we'll help you navigate through it. And so, some of this data that is incomplete, maybe not very necessary or insightful to you. And, or if you can't get that data, then you kind of have to make decisions without it. But again, it's educating people and helping our clients and our colleagues to navigate through the world of data and not get frightened or feel that they're drowning. But, there's incomplete data. It's still prolific, and I think it will go on for quite a long time.
Yeah, I agree, and almost you'll never get 100% data, as you said, because nobody can predict the future. Because if none of us would be here, if he'll be in the Bahamas. But it's there's always going to be the issue with data, and sometimes you just will never get that data, and it's just understanding the business question of where you want to get to. So even something as crude, you've got something very technical like Google Maps that gets satellite images, etc. So if you really wanted to plan your journey with Google Maps, you could do it right down to like the cracks in the pavement. But if you don't have it, you could probably still, people just get a back of an envelope and draw a line from point A to point B and still know that they want to get to point B. It's just they wouldn't have as much detailed information of how to get there, but they still have that goal that they need to get to point B. And it's understanding in analytics what data you really need to make that journey as smooth as possible, and what data is just periphery data that is nice to have, but it's not the groundbreaking data that you really need to get there.
Okay, so shifting gears a little bit here, point 9, when we look at the use of visualization, we looked at the 5 major markets, and interesting to see the difference. So France leads the pack. 50% of people surveyed in France are using data visualization compared to 37% in the UK. And you can see the different countries here. Quite a variety, or quite a difference in the countries. Andy, any thoughts of what's going on here when you look at the major markets across Europe?
Well, again, this is another surprising insight. Obviously, I'm aware. I'm based in the UK, so I'm much more connected to the community in the UK. So I probably would overestimate maybe what's happening in the UK. I've just realised, I'm just thinking data in the UK has been on everyone's minds as we went through Brexit recently. There was a lot of use of incorrect use of data there, so maybe the statistic is a little bit more realistic as we realise we can just make up facts these days in this post-truth political world. I think we have customers across Europe. The French is a really big, fast-growing market, but it does surprise me, particularly Denmark and the Nordics, that it's so low. And again, I guess we have to just turn this into an opportunity.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. And the final point is point 10. So this one is about IT. So IT is still in charge of data. 42% people surveyed say their IT department holds the keys to data in their company. But we're increasingly seeing departmental leaders that are making decisions about data, getting full access to data. Nick, do you see this happening in your company?
Yeah, there's been a big shift in terms of the function of IT and the way it works within our business. In terms of it's not just about help desk and support and stuff. So certainly from my point of view, when deploying technologies, the first thing I did was go to IT and go, okay, I need your help in terms of the infrastructure alone. And then with the infrastructure comes about data and where we house it. That we have to follow obviously legal precedents globally. We need to think about how we store data. So it's absolutely I think it's more about working with IT, and certainly as a department head, it's I will choose the technology that I think most appropriate for the time. But it's definitely working with IT to say, okay, how do we do this in the best and most efficient way possible, and that we make sure it's secure and we have the right infrastructures and the backup plans and high availability and all that kind of good stuff. And it also requires our data architecture team to work extraordinarily closely with IT. So it's much more of a partnership rather than of them and us. And I think that's a good thing of, getting people who really do the day-to-day running of technology and really understand infrastructure, and then, working with data architects and then stats guys and people like me to kind of go, how do we make this work, and then how do we build this infrastructure, this picture to make it last and scale it? So yeah, I think they're still in charge of a lot of things, but I think it's more about being in partnership.
Yeah, I'd add to that in some ways this is almost three questions. There's data access, data integration, and data analysis. And access and integration, I think, it is and should be IT. Sometimes we get problems where the business people try and sort of go rogue and install platforms sort of without IT's knowledge, and that creates problems down the road. I did that when I was an analyst at the University of Oxford, and it didn't go very well. So you've got to work with IT for the access and integration, but the business questions, the analysis, it's the people at the business, the salesperson who's trying to work out why sales are not growing in France or Germany or wherever. They're the ones who have the question and the desire and drive to do the analysis. So whether they actually get their hands on the tool to do it themselves or work very closely with IT to iterate sort of in the same room with the people who can control the tools, then you're not going to get the success. So access and integration, definitely IT. Analysis, certainly in conjunction with business or controlled by the business.
So, question: are you guys seeing sort of equal willingness on both sides to kind of go into that partnership at a deeper level?
Sorry, we see various different levels of it. I think there's a massive cultural change to say, okay, here's a data set, go and make your own conclusions from it, right? And that comes in certain industries, that comes with massive risk, right? In finance, that somebody could make horrifically bad conclusions just by aggregating the data incorrectly. And that's where when we see success is the IT, that they're doing the data processing, creating the data sources, creating the data flows, and saying, look, here's the flagship KPIs, the flagship measures, and we can publish those in kind of the ivory temple, but here's a sandbox on which to play with. And so we're trying to get people to make that cultural change to be like, everyone's got questions. They can be trusted if they've got the right tools and the right training.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I think when I first went to the IT infrastructure director and said, okay, I'd like to introduce and bring in Tableau as a technology, the reaction I got was quite what do you think you need to do this for and why and this and the other? And I actually just said, okay, well, actually, I'm trying to ask your advice. I think it is the important thing about engaging people on all levels, like whether it's IT with infrastructure, with management, with understanding what data we have and how to analyze it correctly, because, any data can be misinterpreted. And also working within the organizations to say, what do we as the organization need? What kind of access? What kind of analysis? What is the way to get people not to be afraid of data and kind of, get their hands on it?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I couldn't really agree more with the comments just gone. I suppose the one thing is it's almost managing, maybe the fear is not the right word, but the uncertainty. So to go back to your point, the business, some members of the business might be a bit afraid to analyze the data themselves or give access to the teams to analyze the data themselves without the confidence that they'll get the right answer. And also there's a bit of concern maybe from the IT side to say, well, what if we release the data into the open world, especially in, say, the financial services industry where data protection, there's many, many laws on data protection now, and it's much more risk averse in terms of it. So it's really working with both sides to allay the concerns rather than anything else, I think, because people are afraid of the unknown, and it's working together to make sure that actually, if you've got the right tools, data analytics is actually fairly straightforward. And also IT is not just about analytics, it's about the infrastructure, the security, the safety, and there's different skills for different roles.
Okay, great conversation, guys. Thanks very much. So Andy, Nick, Simon, thank you so much for your insights. That concludes the 10 points. Hope everyone found it useful. And we're going to pass it back to Bill to go into question period now.
Well, guys, thanks so much. That was an excellent presentation, so we'll get started with today's Q&A. And I want to thank the audience for their participation. We've had a lot of questions that have come in during the presentation, so we'll do our best to get through all of them in the time remaining. And during the Q&A session, I'll leave up this screen with contact information for our 4 panelists if you'd like to contact them following today's event. So let's get started. You know, if there was one thing that your study focused on, it was the increasing importance of data literacy for everyone in business. So just broadly, what tips can you give us on how to become more data literate in order to get on this bandwagon?
This is Andy. I'll dive in. I think there's a great book called Steal Like an Artist. One of the things our customers do is just practice and look at the incredible things that are happening in the community. It happens that Alteryx and Tableau seem to have 2 of the most passionate, vibrant technology communities I've ever seen in the industry. And you know, a lot of the people who've become real experts just see what they like, download a copy of it, and this is public data, reverse engineer it, and then take inspiration from that, and just try things out. So just get out and do it, basically.
Terrific. Anybody else care to join on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree. Oh, go on. Sorry, you go first.
Okay, no, sure. I mean, how to become more data literate? I mean, I guess I would say it's also practice to how you can translate data to non-data literate people. I think that's the best way that you can really make an impact in an organization, and is actually, in some ways, probably one of the harder skills to do. So I guess a tip would be understand what you want to answer and almost understand the flow or the information flow of where it is. So if you want to increase your profitability or your income, or you've got your customer journey line, what data points do you need to understand at each part of the journey? And then if you can combine the data points, you can then tell the story. So I would definitely practice linking complex data to a very top level helicopter view would be my tip.
Okay, well, thanks for those.
Yeah, I was going to say, just to add to that, I think it's absolutely true that we should have, a sandbox, let people make mistakes and let them kind of play around with data and with technologies, and because that's the way they're going to learn.
Yep.
Certainly agree. Yeah, that was a terrific answer. Relative to the study, did you find significant differences? I know you pointed to France in terms of visualization adoption, but what about differences in other countries in Europe? And did you expect to find major differences between your study and, for example, what's going on in Asia and America?
This is Andy again. I think I would have, before I saw the data, the answers in the study, I would have related it to the activity of the community in the local, in each of the regions. Again, going back to the way we see our customers, and it's not, and I'm not just talking about relationships between data visualization customers of Tableau and Alteryx and how they talk to organization, to us as companies, but how they talk to each other. So in the UK, there's some very active community user groups. A lot of friendships and relationships have been enabled because of that. And then we see that to a lesser extent across mainland Europe and to a very large degree in the US, very active user group communities there. And I think for different regions to develop, it's a case of getting that ball rolling. There's nothing more fun for me as a data geek seeing an infused data scientist, data analyst sharing their battle stories. And once somebody starts that community in a region, it can really create a critical mass very, very quickly, and that network can grow very rapidly.
It's Nick here. I totally agree with that, and certainly we're taking a leaf out of Tableau's book and setting up an internal community to get people who are data analysts, data scientists, and people who are day-to-day planners to join and use a portal like SharePoint or whatever to share their great work, share, as you say, their battle stories, and to help get the technology adoption and to get people to kind of talk about stuff and share their best work so people can lift and shift rather than reinvent the wheel.
Excellent. Oh, thank you for those great answers. Now, Alteryx and Tableau, you both are obviously on the forefront of analytic self-service. And we saw that actually adoption is not moving very fast. And by the way, it's not moving that fast here in the United States either. What are the barriers that your customers are seeing, and how can we help them get past those things?
From a Tableau point of view, I think one of the challenges we face is getting people to know the difference between data visualization and analytics. I think in 2016, it feels like data visualization itself has become a commodity. You know, every tool can build a great dashboard, right? But and many organizations think, because that's kind of what the vendors have been saying for the last 10 years, is that dashboards are the solution. And so a lot of people think, well, dashboards, that's what we needed to build, we're done. But actually, that's only the start of the journey, because what a dashboard does is show you an issue or a success, which you then have to ask, well, why did that happen? And that's where the next level of the next step for organizations has to come from, because then it's like, okay, well, why did that happen? And answering those questions requires exploration, might require data manipulation, a bit more data prep. And I think that's the challenge we face in our industry now, is to make people realize that data visualization and dashboards, well, okay, that's a good start, but it's the unknown questions, the unanticipated questions that we need to focus on next. And I think that's making people realize that their dashboards are possibly dead ends is a big challenge and opportunity.
Andy, thanks. Stuart, anything from Alteryx?
No, I agree with what Andy said, and I think that as we start to see people, what we typically see is people will take on a product like Tableau, for example, and start using it and pushing it and using it more and more because they love it so much, and then they do get to a point where the data challenges inside the organization become more and more apparent. And so I think there's definitely, we saw in the survey that was a major block for people for this to really take off inside companies. We are seeing more awareness around that now, and I think that just as we, I still think that the numbers do look low, but we are seeing some good momentum. And don't forget that in the survey we saw everyone expected the importance of self-service analytics to grow in the next coming years. So even though we're still kind of at the starting point, we are seeing good momentum, and for me it's more just about awareness and better tools that can address these challenges that are holding people back today.
Well, thanks for that insight. Now, obviously our audience is comprised of a whole variety of different levels of skills in analytics and data science, and there was a question about whether or not your study, which couches its language in terms of analytics, gave you any insight into the difference, for example, between the use of analytics and data science. Is there a direction or a move toward predictive analytics instead of descriptive analytics, or are they both growing, or how do they relate to each other?
It depends really what you want to do. I don't think in some ways I try not to distinguish between the two. I think if you've got the skill set to do predictive, you've got the skill set to do descriptive. I think potentially there can be confusion as what is the difference between BI, analytics, data science, and sometimes we run the danger of creating silos within a silo. I kind of think there's definitely areas for both. Sometimes you might overcomplicate the pudding by trying to be prescriptive when all you really want to do is descriptive. You just want to understand your clusters. You just want to understand how you're performing at the moment, and then almost by default you can then predict where you're moving. Predictive analytics is kind of almost a different side of the same coin. So I think it's almost, maybe that's one of the reasons why it's not progressing as quickly as maybe we'd like, is because we're trying to answer one question and trying to just look at the overall big picture. I'm still, even myself, I'm kind of confused really what we mean by the difference between analytics and data science. I think there's a lot of crossover. It's the same. I mean, you talk to one organization with data scientists, and for me, I'd say, well, that's just kind of standard BI. And then I meet another organization, they've just got what they call senior analysts, and I'd say, well, you're pure data science. I don't think it's actually been defined as an industry, to be honest.
Well, there is a lot of ambiguity, and I want to thank you all for some great answers to some very good questions. You know, for those of you who asked questions that weren't answered today, we'll be sending all the unanswered questions to Stuart, Andy, Nick, and Simon and the Alteryx team so they can follow up with you after today's webinar. You know, I have just a few quick announcements. If you'd please mark your calendars for November 1st, that's our next DSC webinar sponsored by Teradata. Also, remember that today's taping will be available for on-demand viewing later today, and you can find that on the homepage of datasciencecentral.com in the webinar tab at the top of the page. Well, this brings today's webinar to a close. I'd like to thank our audience for their attendance and the thoughtful questions, and a special thanks again to Alteryx for their sponsorship, and our speakers today, Stuart, Andy, Nick, Simon, for their insight into today's topic. My name is Bill Voorhees. I'm very pleased to have been your host for today's event. I look forward to seeing you all again on November 1st. Have a great day.